typical place for Hollywood to demonstrate Italians as wearing tight pants, slick back hair with grease, gangster affiliated, and so forth and so on. And Lou Rego and I were talking about our mutual experiences on Taylor Street a couple of months ago when he helped me bury my mother. And he said, well, you don't sound Taylor Street. And I said, well, you don't sound Taylor Street either. He said, well, then we're the only two who don't. And I guess I rejected that whole image. I always had a part in my hair. I always wore blue instead of black. And I always did things that didn't look stereotypically Italian. We never spoke Italian at home. My grandparents would only speak it when the cugini came over. And then we were told to leave the room, as if we would know what was going on anyway. It wasn't until I entered Loyola and studied Italian that I picked up a couple of words here and there, so that at least when we visited our ancestral home in Italy, I could say hello and goodbye to my cousins there. I understood what it was at a very early age to have a mixed marriage. Part of my family has Jewish blood, and that was very controversial in its day. I married an Irish woman. That almost killed a lot of people on the Irish side. But that was 46 years ago. And we're still together. We have 5 kids and 4 grandkids, so it kind of worked out. You know, you can have mixed marriages and they work. They tore down a lot of my uncle's family business, our family home on Taylor Street when they built the university. And by then we, however, my personal parents, we were living in the neighborhood of Our Lady of Sorrows Basilica. And Father Conrad asked me, well, why didn't you go to Mother Cabrini with the Scalabrinians? I said, my father said we were American. We went to the American church. But our whole block was Italian, Polk Street. And they all went to Our Lady of Sorrows. So I don't get the whole idea that this was an American church, because when you walk in there, it looks like something from Italian Renaissance. And actually, I used Our Lady of Sorrows analogy as being the Renaissance Church of Chicago in my first book. After 33 years in education, I retired and I started writing stories for my grandkids, essentially. So the first 2 books were Irish in honor of my wife and that heritage, and then the last 3 have been Italian. And in the Stonecutter Genius, I dwelled on an old Italian legend called the Legend of the Magi Ring, which most people probably never heard about. It only existed, I think, in Tuscany. I'm half Tuscan and half Abruzzese. And Tuscan people are very superstitious, as was my grandmother, who lived to be 103 years old. And she went to visit the gypsies to learn about the future of her family and things like that. So I don't know if that superstitious blood was inherited genetically or whatever, but I was intrigued by this ring story. Apparently the Medici in Florence wore this ring, said to hold supernatural powers, and therefore it protected them from bad things happening to their political system in Renaissance Italy. And I guess it worked a little bit, because he became the mentor of Michelangelo, who turns out to be one of the 2 greatest artists of Western civilization. So, and I dwelled on Michelangelo in the story, because I found it hard to believe that a contemporary of Da Vinci and so forth believed that there was a spirit trapped in this ring and it protected people. But they said when Lorenzo Medici died, the spirit was released from the ring, and lots of people saw the after effects of this spirit leaving the ring and so forth. So that's just too good of a story not to put in a book, right? So the whole book now is laced with this idea of superstition and supernatural, and the blending of the Catholic faith with the superstitious idea of these spirits coming to protect us. Well, then I went on, and in the spirit of Pope Francis, who said, who are we to judge? in the second Italian book, The Brooch, I decided I'm going to get a little spicy, I'm going to get a little, controversial, which for me is out of the question because I'm a traditional Catholic. I've been a deacon for 26 years. I did all the things right. I only have one scar on my leg from the nuns beating me. I'm really a good kid. So, but I tackled the burning question about Michelangelo. Well, everyone thought he was gay. Well, I don't know. Was he? So I did a lot of research and came to the conclusion that he may have had some tendencies or whatever, but it was more of a classical eye for art in those days in the Renaissance, where they were rediscovering classical architecture and sculpture and art and things like that. He fell in love with Vittorio Colonna. And if you read those love letters, you'd find it hard to believe that he didn't have some kind of physical relationship. So I took license to give Michelangelo a love interest. And at the same time, not ignoring the environment in which he lived and the things he was accused of. And you can read in the book what he thought himself. And I tried to make him real. Most people make Michelangelo kind of an eccentric loner who laid like Charlton Heston on the scaffold to paint the Sistine Chapel, when really the reason I liked Michelangelo and the reason he was my hero as a kid was he was the same height and weight as me in my thinner days. From Our Lady of Sorrows, we moved out west to Oak Park, St. John's Church, and we raised a couple of kids, and my wife decided we needed to leave the city and move to the country, so we live in a small town of 10,000 people in Wisconsin now. The 5 kids are grown up, and 4 grandkids are teenagers. So, and I decided to write my books, and the new book, Stolen Christmas, takes me back to Taylor Street. I always had a feeling that that's where the heart of the Italian community was. I never lost that. Every weekend we went back to Little Italy, as I call it. It's unofficial because Chicago refuses to call Taylor Street Little Italy. And never, even though they call themselves Little Italy, the University Village Association, which runs the businesses on Taylor Street, kind of represents them, must use UVA as their name and not Little Italy. I didn't know that. That there's still that kind of political tug of war going on there, and that goes all the way back to the time when the university was being built, and Florence Scala and my Aunt Jo were among the protesters to try to save what was left of Little Italy. The centerpiece of Little Italy for me was always Our Lady of Pompeii. When I took my students on Mr. C's trip to see his Chicago, it was always to Taylor Street, it was always to St. Ignatius High School, it was always to Our Lady of Pompeii Church, Holy Family, and so forth. All the enclave that affected my family and my personal life as I matured, and I always brought my students to experience where their teacher came from. Our Lady of Pompeii, Father Fragomeni, gave permission for me to use the church as a centerpiece of my story in Stolen Christmas, as did Father Caruso of St. Ignatius High School to use their campus as the focal point for the adolescent characters in the literature. All the businesses that you probably are familiar with, if you've ever been down Taylor Street, Rosebud, Tuscany, Al's Beef, they also help support the writing of this book. Because for me it was an act of love, it was a way to try to show the positive things of Taylor Street and the renaissance of Taylor Street and Little Italy area as it became gentrified in recent years, and try to preserve the ethnicity and the culture of the Italian community, despite the fact that it was almost decimated by the building of the university and urban renewal. In the story, some of, I guess, my background of having mixed blood and in my family and things like that, I thought that was a contemporary issue that we read about every day. And as I interviewed different people, for instance, the owner of Mario's Lemonade, an Italian man who was a storyteller, he should be up here because, my God, the stories he would have you rolling on the aisles. And But he married a Mexican woman. And he's the most Italian guy you ever met in your life. And she's the most gracious lady you ever want to meet in your life. And I thought, and my son is about to marry a Mexican-American girl. This is going to be the central characters of the book, and the conflict of two similar Latin cultures. Last night, Father mentioned how family and faith and tradition seem to be the core of the Italian experience and also the Mexican community, and yet you couldn't get two cultures further apart. When I studied for the diaconate, it was my first experience of really being immersed in Hispanic culture, and well, my wife loved it. My wife thought it was the greatest thing. We didn't have the same time to ergo. We sang all these happy songs in church and stuff, and she thought that was great. But they're more than that, and I learned a lot about their culture and how their struggles to become American are very similar to the Italian experience as we try to become American as well. And so you have a Romeo and Juliet subplot in the story, which is really kind of a cutesy story where a little boy finds out his church, Our Lady of Pompeii, is going to be destroyed the day after Christmas, so he wants to stop Christmas. And in that plot, a miracle happens. And if you've ever been in Our Lady of Pompeii, there's a mural on the, I think it's the west aisle of St. Nicholas, and that tells you what the miracle is, I think. So take a look at it and see if you feel a